And we're live. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to our 9th episode of The Writer's Journey, live on Keystroke Medium. I'm your host, Lauren Moore, and with me is Kaylee Williams and our guest, Clark Chamberlain.
Hey there.
At this point, we've covered the basics of story structure, and now we're ready to apply it in a novel. In this episode of The Writer's Journey, we're going to dig deep into novel structure with our guest, Clark. He's an editor and writing coach. Clark is one of the hosts of the Book Editor Show and Writership, 2 podcasts for authors who want to improve their craft. He's self-published and has 2 writing courses geared towards helping self-publishing authors improve their craft. The one we're going to talk about tonight a bit is Punch Them in the Gut, Writing Fiction with Emotional Impact. It's got loads of fantastic reviews from indie authors, and you can find that and more about Clark at thebookeditorshow.com. So welcome, everybody. It's great to see you tonight.
Thanks for having me on. I've been so excited about this. This is really cool to be back here.
Yeah. We booked this like a month ago, and I've been counting down the days, practically novel structure, Clark Chamberlain. It's going to be great.
Everything's been building up to novel structure in Clark. It really has.
Yes.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that there's no pressure to do well tonight. So
no pressure, none at all.
You're going to be fantastic. No worries.
So, Clark, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you've been up to lately, and how you got into coaching authors?
Sure. So a little about myself. I really have been everywhere in the world, a lot of places, lived all over, and have experienced a ton of stuff. And somewhere along the line, I really started to get into writing, especially when I was in the Army over in Baghdad. And when I got back, I wanted to publish this book. And I don't know if you've heard of Danny Inney. He has a few things. I took a course from him on audience building. And he was talking all about this idea of, hey, you need to find where the hole in the market is. If you can find where that hole is, that's where you need to be. And so I started looking at everything, and I'd edited news and had worked in journalism before, but, I wasn't thinking of myself as a fictional editor. And I was like, but the hole in the podcast marketplace is there's no shows on editing. There's nothing on there. That's the hole. So Peter Turley and I started the show, and, we took all the stuff we could and learned. And that was really what it was for us. We were constantly learning and improving our own work, and taking all the stuff we had and then applying it as the second phase, not just talking about it in writing, but coming back to it in editing. And along from that, all of a sudden, instead of becoming, this world famous writer, now I'm a mediumly famous editor and story coach, which has been really good because there's an infectious energy from authors. I love getting to work with them. I love getting to hear, their ideas, because they bring them with passion and force. And it's a lot of fun to help nurture that and grow it into a story that they're very proud of.
Yeah, that hole in the marketplace is real. Back in 2016, I told Clark this earlier. Back in 2016, I was an English teacher, and I'd been teaching for 8 years at that point. And I wanted to get into editing, and I wanted to get into self-publishing, and had no idea how to do that. And I went on YouTube and found the Book Editor Show. And that's where I saw you guys in action as editors, talking about how to restructure novels. That got me into writership. Later, you were interviewed on Keystroke Medium, and that video is how I found Keystroke Medium back in 2016. And then I started editing that summer, and it worked well, and I kept with it. And it was because of your show, inspired me to get into it. So thank you.
You're very welcome. It's just amazing how cyclical life is, how, because I guess I've been missing from the internet for a while now, because I've been having to get in and getting help with a traumatic brain injury that I had in 2015 and some injuries and PTSD from the war. And so I've been kind of gone. So it's you guys reaching out. That's me coming back into this. And so it is really interesting how this comes about. And when you told me that story today, it made me tear up, because it's just cool, how we never know for sure the effect we're having on people. and what it is that we're doing. And sometimes we sell ourselves really short that way. We choose not to do something because we don't think it matters, or we think someone else has already done it better. But our voices are real, and they can reach people in ways that we have no idea. I mean, if we'd not had the show and you told me about it, I'd never know that, and it's cool. It's almost cooler to not know, I think. But like this is really cool too. So thank you.
Yeah. So you audience out there, your voice needs to be heard. You are touching people's lives, and you don't even know the impact that you're having, but it is there, it is present. And that book you're writing right now that you're working so hard on, get it finished, get feedback from someone, get it published. People want to hear it. I want to hear about it. Future Comedian wants to hear about it. Clark wants to hear about it. We all want to hear about it.
I agree. I mean,
go Army. Yeah, that's what the chat says. Go Army. JR's here. All right, great.
I mean, even I was telling my daughter, even, a single grain of sand can tip the scales, so it doesn't matter how small the thought or the book or the concept, write it, do it. It can impact someone one day, and you might not even know it, but we hear stories every day of, oh man, I wrote this book 7 years ago and I got this email of this person, in a hospital bed, and reading it helped them through it. Those sorts of things are real. And
yeah, and I think it's super important. So like when I did journalism is very ephemeral, like it's very short-lived. You produced a show and it was over, and it's time for the next newscast and it's gone. But a book, these ideas, they stick, and like you said, it could be years later, and maybe you thought it didn't do anything, but it's a legacy asset that you can build. And that's why it's so important to build it right, because it's not only, if we're talking from a money side, it's not only going to have the ability to make money for you in this lifetime, but it could make money for your family in lifetimes to come. Mm-hmm. And if we're talking about it from the human side, you have no idea of just how impactful that can be because of how long it can last. And so it's really, and that's why I think that I'm so passionate about storytelling, because of the power that it has to change people and to do things. And we don't have to do it to change the world or anything like that. But like, if you take it seriously enough, it can be your assets forever. So,
all right, that makes
great care.
Really awesome.
Great editors.
Yeah, it makes a really great segue into novel structure, writing the best novel that you can, so that it makes that passive income into the future, and so it can create something that touches people's lives, entertains them, helps them escape, helps them grow, all of that. But before we do that really awesome segue, because Clark, that was great. Dean in the chat says, Clark, your podcast episode on the Monster of the Week structure greatly impacted my current series. Thanks.
Very welcome. I'm looking forward to this next October to do more monster stuff. I love monster stuff. It's so much fun. So.
All right. So our first question on novel structuring is, so this is for you as an editor and as a writing coach. When you're evaluating novel manuscript or outline, what are you looking for in terms of structure? Or Dean asked this question ahead of time. How do you systematically attack the edit of a novel? What's your system for approaching a manuscript?
So first thing that I have to do, either way, whether it's an outline or a novel, I got to read the whole thing first. Because you can't edit, especially as an editor, you can't edit it a page at a time, because you don't know what the reveal is at the end, what the climax is. You got to understand what the story is. And for me, actually, another reason why I do it this way, I don't talk to the author about the story. I don't want them to tell me what the story is about. I don't want to do anything. I want to see, and I want to put down my notes as I'm going through, and I want to go and have a conversation with them afterwards to make sure that I understood what it was about. Because we find that as writers, we're too close to the work. And so we may have been thinking, we understood something there and we miss it. And so that's what, as an editor, that's what the things I'm looking for. I'm looking for structure. I'm looking for pacing. I'm looking for have we moved properly from Act 1 to Act 2 to Act 3? Is the resolution the proper amount at the end? Two of the places that I spend a lot of time with are the beginning and the first act, and then also the climax and resolution. And because those are two of the places that are going to be most remembered throughout the entire book. Plus, Act 1 a lot of times gets rushed. There's a lot of advice today that I disagree with about getting into the story really quickly. You know, like if you're going to try to get an agent, you need to grab the story so fast right at the beginning that it tosses them right in there. And I read stuff like that, and it misses the setup that you need to have a powerful transformation, a powerful transformational arc of your character throughout it. If you don't show us what life was like before the events take place, we don't really understand how we can get there next. So I start looking for those types of things. And I actually have 10 scenes that I definitely make sure that are there. They don't have to be like when we're listening to Jamie Gold talk about beats. You know, she has everything structured into percentage wise. I don't look for things to show up at an exact percent, but if they're not there, then I know that we've got a hole. I know we've got a problem. Right. And so these 10 things, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought there because I'm trying to open it up at the same time. So the 10 most important scenes I look for opening action. You know, does the story start off strong? Do we start where it needs to? Is the protagonist being introduced properly? Do we have a deep introduction? Is the protagonist choosing to enter the plot, or is the plot grabbing a hold of the protagonist and dragging them along? That's something I look for, because if the plot's dragging them, we have a hard time understanding why the protagonist would want to do it and keep going. I want to make sure that there are scenes, you know, that really develop the understanding of characters in the world that we're in. Even if we're in just a modern day novel, we really need to make sure that that's there. Showing that the protagonist can have success, even though it's small, because most of the time we're just kicking the shit out of the protagonist the whole time and piling on all the problems. We need to know that there's some kind of success there. I look to see if the protagonist is actually caring about the story. Like, why are they really committing to all this? We got to have that total failure or dark night of the soul, or that moment of turn there. Seeing them re-strengthen, of course, the climax and resolution. And those 10 scenes, it doesn't matter what genre you're writing in, those 10 scenes will appear in every book. And I know this is a question that I saw in the notes there. I'll just jump ahead to it. But the idea, though, comes along and people ask me, what structure should I use? Right? What structure should I be using to write this story? Because there's a lot, right? You know, someone comes along and says, well, I use the 3-act. No, I use the 4-act. I've got the 7-star method or the snowflake method. And there's all these different methods, like hero's journey and everything. But really what it comes down to is these are just different names for the exact same thing. In Western storytelling, if you've heard me ever speak before, I talk about the idea that as humans, our native language, no matter where we were born or what actual language we speak, our native language is story. Like this is how we communicate with each other. And in my studies here, I've found that there are 3 basic dialects of story, if you will. There's Eastern, there's Middle Eastern, and there's Western. So when we're writing a story here in the West, we want to use that structure. And that structure for Western storytelling is the 3-act structure with a hero. And that's why all these things actually line up the same way, no matter what structure we're using. Just like with Jamie Gold was saying, you know, that they're the same thing. And part of that, I think, is because as teachers, we want to come up with new words for the same thing so that we can show a different way to do it. But it's the same way. Right. But swinging way back to what we were talking earlier, like it's the voice, right? So I could have an author who's not understanding 3-act, but if I show them the 3-act using the 7-star method or the snowflake method, that might be the thing that really snaps with them, and they get it at that point. So even though it's the same thing, you've got to find the language that makes sense for you, so that you can follow a structure. So if you like my 10 most important scenes, that can be a structure you can follow.
Where can we find that?
Yes. So
website?
Yes, thebookeditorshow.com. It's right there at the front. You can download it right there, and it'll have all of them and break that down on what is involved in each of those steps.
That is really cool. That's pretty concrete way to think of it differently, because I hear a lot. It's like, oh, well, I tried 3-act, tried Snowflake, just a different language. It's all the same thing, but what one makes sense to you.
Right. And I guess I should clarify what the other two are. So if you were doing a Middle Eastern, you think about what is it that they understand with their story. So the story is a chosen group with a chosen hero. And that chosen group, chosen hero is what's going to solve the problem or get through the story. If you're in the East, the idea is that the group has to come together to overcome the issues. You don't have a single hero. You have a group or a couple of individuals that have to learn how to work together to overcome the issues. And then in the West, we have a hero that overcomes these things. And so what we really are talking about is the type of person involved. And then you can see, like in the East, you've got 4-act structure. It is a real 4-act structure. It's not just taking a second act and splitting it in half. Like it's a true 4-act structure. And so there are different ones in different places. And when you can start to understand that, and it becomes even more important when you're writing to an audience, right? You need to know who that audience is. So if I was actually going to write to a predominantly anime audience, watches a lot of anime, I actually would want to do an Eastern story structure, because that is most of anime. It's all Eastern story structure. This idea of group coming together to overcome things to then defeat the enemy or whatever the obstacle is.
That's so true. I'm having flashbacks to Sailor Moon.
Exactly.
Not gonna lie, love that show. Segueing, I suppose, maybe. What are some signs of and a story going like off structure? Then, like, at what point is that like acceptable? Is there like a way to measure that?
So yes, there are absolutely ways to measure it. Starting to look at percentages, starting to actually break down how large the novel is, where things are falling. I have an Excel spreadsheet of my own that I made that I go through and track, how long each chapter is, but then also how long each scene is, because you might have multiple scenes in a chapter. What's happening in each of those scenes, and are they progressing? I only usually track A story and B story. If you had multiple subplots, you could also track that. And like if you have a scene or a chapter that's missing anything, it's not really advancing any of those storylines, the question is, what's it there for? And so you need to look at those. That can be one way. Definitely, like if you're genre writing, you need to be spending time in the genre. You need to be reading the genre, because there are specific structures that are involved in that genre. I once was thinking I was writing a romance. I wasn't sure, because it was my first novel. I wasn't sure if it was a romance novel or not, because there was a love story in there. But I got a book on writing romances, and I clearly knew quite fast that I was not writing a romance. The rule structures in there are very strict and have things that they're looking for that hit at certain points in time. So those are things that you can look at for sure. Was there a third part of that question?
I muddled it up a little bit. I'm sorry. But no, that was perfect. But would you also
tell when a book's going off structure?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. How to tell when it's going off structure.
Yeah. But you're also asking when you could also get away with it or do that. And I want to make it super clear. You can do whatever you want. You're the writer. You can do whatever you want. The question is, who's the audience? Because if you are trying to reach a specific audience, whether commercial or, your favorite writing group or whatever it is, you need to be meeting their expectations. And so you can't go writing a story that takes away from those expectations, that runs off the rails. If I'm going to go make a sci-fi story, I can't, use a structure for romance and have the same type of effect that I would if I was actually using the proper sci-fi structure. So that's something to take a look at. If you're working in more of a literary type area, you have some more leeway, because that audience expects more leeway. And so it really comes down to audience. That's a huge part. It's one thing I always ask my authors when I start working for them is, what's your intent? Because maybe your intent is you want to write a novel for your kids. Okay. Maybe your intent is, hey, I want to be the next really big pulp fiction writer. I want to crank these out once per week and at a particular genre audience. You got to know that going into it. Maybe you're just writing it for yourself. If you're writing it for yourself, go crazy, go whatever you want to do with it, because it's you, and just let yourself move forward. So that helps me as an editor and a coach to know what the expectation is, where the audience is, what they want to do with it.
So the point of structuring your novel is to figure out, how can I make this book really satisfy my readers? And one of the ways you can figure out how to do that is know your audience, know what they're expecting, and figure out how to deliver that. But in general, when you look at novel structure, what does it take to structure your novel to satisfy an audience?
So you're going to start looking again. Let's just use the Western storytelling 3-act. You do want to have 3 acts in there that needs to be clear. So one of the ways that I look at this, we want to make sure that in Act 1 we have the world as it currently is. I'll use my here. Here's a Mickey Mouse. Okay, if you're watching this, I got Mickey Mouse, and he's upright. So this is normal world for Mickey. Okay, in Act 2, Mickey gets turned upside down, and his world goes completely off the rails, and it's all getting screwed up, and everything that Mickey knew is not working anymore. Okay, and so as Mickey moves from Act 2 to Act 3, he has to figure out what he knew in Act 1, combine it what he knows in Act 2, and then he becomes something new for Act 3. Look, it's a new Mickey. It's old Mickey, new Mickey. Okay, because he's got to be able to put those things together in order to overcome what our major antagonist has been throughout this entire thing. And he's only going to be able to do that with what he was in the beginning, what he learned in the second act, to become the thing that he needs to be in order to overcome it in the third. And if that's not there, we have a serious story structure problem. Like that right there is huge. Do we not have a protagonist? And I know that kind of sounds funny, but if you are writing multiple point of view characters, you might not actually have a protagonist in there. So you might be missing, you think it's a hero, you think it's an anti-hero, but really you're not even spending enough time with one person in particular that you get a full feeling of that transformation. So do you not have an antagonist? I'm not talking about a bad guy, but if you don't have anything there that's really stopping, really, being something big towards the end, that's a big issue. So we want to look at protagonists. So we want to look at characters. We want to look at the setting. We want to look at our plot, the idea of what the actual story is about. We want to look at our themes. And those are some of our major areas. And if we've got a breakdown there, that's usually a sure sign that we're off structure big time. So as you're going through, again, read in your genre, read and compare it to other things. If you notice, like if you're going through self-editing, you're taking a look and you're like, well, I like this author who also writes in this genre, but I'm way off from what they do. And you can start noticing some things that way as well.
That was an awesome analogy.
Yeah, that was good. I mean, that really brings together a lot of the topics we've been talking about. Been talking about external conflicts and internal conflicts and how those two can work together with the characters. That reminds me of a question that someone asked earlier. Oh, Dean Floyd asked, when you're brainstorming a story, how do you balance structure and character development when the plot of the story and the characters' arcs play off each other so much?
Mm-hmm. So that can be something that's difficult at first. You need to be able to boil it down to one sentence. You don't know your story until you can boil it down to one sentence, which I call the 3 Ps. This is what I teach when I go speak at a grammar school or something like that, when we're just teaching basic story structure. It's a person in a place with a problem. If you don't have that, if you don't know where that's at, then you've got a problem. So so how do you do that? Well, you keep whittling it down. So you've got this really big idea. Maybe it's 5-6 page long synopsis of it, right? So then take those, for instance, grab those 10 scenes. Figure out what your 10 scenes are, boil it down a little bit more until you can bring it down to paragraphs, to 3 paragraphs, what each is in each act, until you get to the point where you can put it into a 1-sentence structure. And then you can really understand where you're at. And that 1-sentence structure is so important because it can also be a compass as you're going through to take a look and say, am I on course? Am I following these things? And sometimes, actually, I think it was with Jamie Gold, you guys were talking about where the reveal is going to be, of something, and it might be at the end, but really it belonged right between Act 1 and 2 type of a thing. So that can be a part of it, is knowing where that's going to be. And if you're writing up this sentence, you're thinking of it as an elevator pitch and you want to hook someone, but actually in this sentence, you want to make sure that that problem is the real big problem, not the smaller problem that might be in the middle of the book. You want it to be the end problem. So that way you can always focus on that, because you want to make sure that you're following that target and heading that direction. One of the things that I would always do when you're creating a story, and as a, when we think about how perhaps we did it in high school or younger, we started just writing, right? We started just writing from the very beginning, and we just did it in chronological order. And just, where's this story going? I don't even know. In fact, I remember one time, it was high school age, and my friend, she's like, I'm writing a story, and it's got these two characters, and they're walking down the path. I don't know where they're going. It's just so fun and all this stuff. And it is cool. It's fun to examine things, but if you don't know where you're going, how will you know when you get there? And so if you're having trouble coming up with what your story is about, start at the end. What do you want the end to be? And I look at things like the math story problems, like this idea of, train leaves California traveling 200 miles an hour, another train leaves Boston traveling at 100 miles an hour. When do they reach Topeka, Kansas, type of thing? Okay. So you've got two events, right? You've got your character and you've got your end, and they're going to meet someplace. And so you start drawing those lines. How do you get there? How do I get my character, who may be just a fishmonger working in this small village, to defeating this dark lord up in this tower? How do I structure and move those pieces together? What would be fun about that? Like what could I see as some of those scenes that could happen in between that might be some problems, or do I need them to have particular allies on the way, or do I need to give them what kind of problems do I want them to face along the way? And these become little tiny step scenes in between, and then you just have to start linking them together. Was it Charles Dickens who used to just hand off the in-between scenes? He would write the stuff that he liked, and then he'd hand off the boring stuff. I don't remember which one it was, but had some assistants, and that's what they did. Like, he wrote the fun scenes, and then he's like, you figure out how to get these people from here to here. And then, those boring
I
parts.
hope not, Charles.
And work through that.
He might have, I don't know.
So I'll have to look that up.
Like
Don't quote me on that one for sure, but it was someone back in that time period.
Do you know that he went on a lot of walks? When he got into a story problem, he would go on walks through London, and he'd listen to people talking around him, and his characters are talking in his head, and walks often to get somewhere in the story. But
yeah, I think you really need to see them as problems. You need to see this as a story problem, which means that it has a solution. And you can't get hung up on all of this stuff. You're a writer, for crying out loud. You create magic. Like, figure it out. Like, what do you need to do to put this stuff together? And I was using a fantasy as an example, but I mean, modern romance would be the same thing, right? How do I keep these two people apart for all this time in between until the end when I get them together? So, you got to think of the problem as, or problems that you got to solve.
That is awesome. I can't fully immerse myself and write my story if I don't know what that ending is. And JR, yes, you will read my Little Pony Space Marines because you're obsessed with it. But yeah, that's so true. Like, I until I know the ending, I can't really get to know my character, because they're here at the beginning, but by the time they get to this ending point, they're someone completely different. So until I know who that different is, I feel like I can't know who they started out as.
Right. And I also think, that's one of the reasons why I would suggest like the 10 essential scenes, or 10 scenes that I've got there, is because or for a pantser, or for someone who likes to discovery write, because you just have these little spots. Like, I'm telling you, 10 spots. There's a lot of scenes in between there that you can have fun exploring as you write, but you ought to have some type of roadmap. I've been doing a lot of traveling. I've been down in Dallas, Texas for a while. Right now I'm in Idaho, and pretty soon I got to run over to Seattle and stuff. So
you're in Idaho?
Yeah. Where are you at?
I'm in Idaho.
I'm in Idaho Falls right now.
Oh my goodness, you're 2 hours away from me.
Really? You're in Twin Falls?
I'm down in Boise.
Okay. Yeah. So,
We can high five. Sorry, I totally derailed you. Got excited.
I forget what I was just saying. Okay, travel. So as long as you're moving across there. So if I go to Dallas, there's going to be some major stops on the way, but there can be a lot of adventure that could happen in between those major stops, and that can be your exploratory writing. That's where you can do a lot of discovery, but those big stops, and that will help you structure it and keep you flowing faster.
And what are those 10 major points that you looked up?
I've been wanting to ask that great question.
Okay, so first, opening action. And what I mean by opening action is that you've got to start your story with something happening. And instead of just this introspection. And it can be, like if you're doing a multiple point of view book, it could be from a different character's point of view about the main action that the protagonist isn't involved yet. The second thing, that you need a deep protagonist introduction. I call this a rest stop, and there's 4 rest stops. And these are little breaks because you've got to dial back the action every once in a while so that the reader can drop their dopamine levels before you ratchet things back up again. So we need to start understanding who the protagonist is and what they're doing, and more about them. We need to have a scene where the protagonist enters a plot, which means that they need to choose to do this, that they're not just being dragged along with it. Now, there's a caveat to this one. If you have a story where they are dragged along at first, like a accidental spy type story, they do need to make that commitment before the second half of Act 2. So, but normally this would be the crossover between Act 1 and Act 2. We move into Act 2. We have another scene, or this can be a few different scenes. Again, these are the second required rest stops, a deeper understanding of our characters and the world that they are involved in. And so because we want to see this place, this is where the fun happens, and we get to see more about what's happening there. We have protagonist initial success. And again, because you're going to give a lot of problems, and the protagonist has already had problems up until this point, but we've got to see some success. And so this, I want to use an example for this is in Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. This is when they beat the troll at Halloween. So because we've got to have an understanding that the protagonist and maybe even who they're with have a possibility of defeating our major antagonist by the end of the book, or we have a hard time believing that, because if they're just continually beat, we need to at least see some type of small success. Our third required rest stop, why does the protagonist care about the plot? Because if they're going to do all this bad stuff, all this bad stuff keeps happening to them, why do they keep going? So we need to understand that. And these are great moments where you can have conversations with other characters and get deeper into them. We have to have that moment of total failure where everything seemed like maybe it was working, and then all of a sudden it falls apart. And protagonist isn't sure if they're going to move on with this. But then, of course, you see the strengthening that takes place in the next act. And this is our 4th required rest stop, where they take that total failure and they learn from the stuff from Act 1, Act 2, and put it all together so they can start moving forward. Then, of course, we get into the climax, which we all know what that is, and then the resolution, because we need to wrap things up. And if you've got a series, this is where you would want to start introducing stuff for the next book for sure. Like if you have a series where you kind of tease what's going to happen in the next one. So like Richard Fox, at the end of all of his books, he's moving them forward into another thing. So those are those.
Goodness,
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to replay that because I got most of them down.
All right, you can get that over at thebookeditorshow.com, and you can download it from there. So I know it's available.
Perfect. Yeah, that end scene, or the end chapter where you're not only wrapping up this conflict in this one book and resolving those conflicts, but then also teasing out for the rest of the series. That's got to be tricky. Do you have any tips on how to do that?
Well, so first of all, I would say you have to know what's going on in the rest of that series. Like you don't want to tease the wrong thing and you drop the idea later on. So if you do understand what's happening, then that's going to be really good. I would, for television, watch the old X-Files, because one of the main threads, like with the Smoky Man and the alien abductions, they've got stories in there that don't connect to the next one, but then they have these small ones that then do have these big reveals at the end, which then propel you to want to know more about that larger overarching story that's taking place. the danger of starting to reveal some of that stuff midway or early on in the book is we want to see stuff resolved at the end. And if there's this huge hanging story that you've been talking about through the entire book, and then it doesn't get resolved, that can really feel raw for the reader. And it might make them not want to go to the next one. I mean, some people would argue, oh, it's a great cliffhanger. Depends on how far in. Like if it's been teased since Act 1 or Act 2, that's way too early. But if it's coming towards middle or end, that's okay. If it's just like some ideas and not a huge problem, but just an idea, like you've introduced a new place or a new character that's going to be involved later on that doesn't actually bring a whole big story problem, then you're cool as well. So, because I really think that the end spot is where, I mean, look at any television, right? Any drama, that's where the twist happens to introduce something new. It's the very end of the episode. We get something different to tease us into the next thing. It wasn't brought in at the beginning or midway point.
So that actually brings us into a question that I've had in the back of my mind. I've heard it called like leaving clues throughout the story to things that might happen, you know, in book 2 or even later in a series. I was wondering if you had any input on how an author can weave that kind of deeper world and character building without disrupting the unity and cohesion of the plot itself.
Right. So first of all, you know, these elements that are going to be in later on need to be very, can't think of the right word. Mine's falling apart. So they need to be throwaway. They need to be a throwaway thing. Okay, so like for instance, Sirius Black's motorcycles in the first chapter of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, he doesn't come back till book 3. You know, like it's a throwaway thing. Like we get introduced to little tiny bits and pieces of characters that might come along later, or problems that might come along later, where we just get set up in particular situations earlier in a book. There's 2 ways you can do this. And so I was recently working with an author, did a beta read here this last month. I love the book. I don't know how much I can say about it because I've got an NDA on it, or non-disclosure agreement. Yeah. And, but at any rate, you know, he has some characters that are early, but then they don't show up anywhere else. So he could take those characters which showed up early on to help establish his characters that are going through the rest of the book. And then if he needs a character in book 2 or book 3, he could go back and find those and grab them out and pull them forward, you know, to have them come back into the story. Or the other way is that you're a major plotter and you've developed all this stuff and you know that in book 1, I'm going to introduce the bounty hunter and it's going to come back in book 5, you know, and then that's a super exciting thing for your readers who's really hooked into that. And they're like, oh my goodness, I remember this guy from, you know, book 1 or whatever it is. And so, but they can't be major elements of the story, right? They can't introduce huge problems that aren't going to be wrapped up because your reader's going to get the end. They're like, well, what happened to this? Especially if it's not going to be immediately in the next book. Like that. So again, it can't be major problems, you know, some small stuff along the way, or characters or items or devices or whatever these things, or places, you know, that you're going to come back to. And I think that if you're getting really good at your storytelling, it becomes this moment of everything I say is important. And if I said it, yeah, like
I know that means something.
Like, this is going to be something because I named the character, or you know, like I looked at something that was important, or the character has a feeling about something, you know. But they're small and they're throwaway. If you put too much emphasis on them, people want to pay off in that book.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, is that almost like when a character, you know, is walking through a room, and you happen to mention a picture that's on a wall, and they think like, oh, that's a weird battle scene, and it just happens. Book 3, that actually happened. I don't know. Anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
And that battle scene or whatever could become a story that happens in the next book. You know, to manage expectations with people. You know, what is the old saying? If a gun shows up in Act 1, it's going to kill someone.
Chekhov's gun, yeah.
Yeah, and so, but what if the gun kills someone in book 2? You know, like, like you can point out stuff in one book that has no other point in that book, and then bring it back in the next book, and then that really kind of turns the expectations.
But the point is, the gun does go off.
The gun does go off. Right. Like if you're taking the time to talk about the gun.
Right. There's got to be a reason.
Something someplace.
Take notes. Always take notes.
Yeah.
Always take notes. Always like, oh God, he thought about XYZ. That's probably going to be important later.
And that's something I'm always amazed with is the subconscious of the author. And this is where it becomes important to have a good beta reader or a good coach or a good editor that can look at your story and say, hey, did you know that you've got, you have this event taking place in chapter 2. If you combine that with your chapter 10 right towards the end and connect these two lines together with this other character, it would be more powerful. Because you've already got the setup here. We just need to twist things a little bit to connect it with this other character over here. And they wouldn't see that coming. That would be really cool. Like, so, because we do that subconsciously. We put things in our books that we might not necessarily see where all the threads are, and someone else can come in and see it and connect it together. I worked with an author, and I was disappointed because there were several of these threads, and it would have been a book that would have been incredible. But I'm not writing the book. Like, I can only make the suggestions, and they didn't want to do it. And it was really sad because it took the whole, it would have taken the whole subterfuge level to 25 on a 10 scale. Like, it would have just bounced it out of the house. Like, it would have just had all this extra stuff, but they couldn't grasp it because they were so dead set on the book they'd already written. Which is just a side note here. If that's you as an author, if you really actually don't want someone to help you, don't ever pay for someone to help you. If you're just looking for someone to tell you that you did it right, have your mom read it. And then, don't, because you're not going to get your money's worth out of it. And you're also going to waste the editor's time if you're not actually coming there to look for help to make something even better than what you had before.
It's a really good point. Yeah. If you're going to have an editor, have a really thick skin and be able to take all the notes that they have for what they are and then really think, is this really going to improve my story? Does it change it beyond what I wanted to say? And, use those.
Right. Because again, also a good editor is not going to write the book for you. They're not going to write their book. I mean, they're going to give you good suggestions on what will improve it, what's already there, not going in and say, you know what, I really would have done it this way instead. They're not going to go in and write their book. They're going to help you write your best book.
And as an editor, sometimes I think of my suggestions as, they're just suggestions, but not even take the suggestion. Does the suggestion spark an idea in your head, spark an even better idea? And sometimes that's the winner right there. Keely, we worked on a story together, and I gave you some feedback. I don't even know what happened to that feedback. What you wrote after that was so different from the story you originally wrote, and it was so much better.
Oh my goodness!
It was like night and day, and I was happy that, I'm not sure what happened in between you reading the feedback and then when you wrote it, but that was a completely different story.
Well, I'm not one of the authors that, I'm writing the story and nothing in it can change, just make the words shine. You gave me that feedback. I'm like, okay, I really took each and everything that you're saying, really thinking about the storyline. And for me, that ending, is everything that's leading up to this ending, making this ending even more impactful? And does each moment resonate something with the reader? And your input on it, took out 3 characters, changed a bit of something, and yeah, I will always be going to you.
That's huge to have someone that you can trust with your work. That's a big thing. And even if you're just doing beta readers, like, make sure it's someone who reads the genre, that understands that kind of story, because they'll be able to give you hints and things that they'll notice things that are missing when we're talking about the story structure off. Find someone who that's all they do is read whatever the genre is. They're going to notice stuff for you. And along with that, ask very specific questions, but or sorry, very open-ended specific questions. So like, if you were to say, did you feel sad when you read this? Don't ask that. And never ask for feedback like, what did you think of the book? Ask very specific things like, what emotion did you feel after you read chapter 2? Did you feel that the protagonist had had an arc that moved them from this point to that point? Like, ask real questions for beta readers, because other than that, if you're not asking those kinds of questions, you're not going to get the feedback that you want.
Yeah, that's really important.
That's really good advice, because that's another one, like the hard things that I think a lot of authors kind of stumble on. That's like, they want beta readers, they find beta readers, but the feedback that they get, it's not enough. So maybe you need to tailor your questions a little bit deeper.
Yeah. And I know that's not what this show's about today, but I'll say one more thing on it. Like, I do that at the end of every chapter. I have a questionnaire at the end of every chapter if I'm using beta readers. So, but again, I don't ask them questions. I don't ask leading questions. I ask open questions so that they can give me an answer. But I do direct the question. I want to make sure I'm getting feedback that I can use.
Something really specific. I like that idea. We got to get you back on later to talk about what to do with the readers, because it sounds like you have a good system. In the chat, you've got a lot of action. William Taylor Davis says, I think a lot of authors hear feedback like this and get overwhelmed. Think they need to rewrite everything, not realizing how easy those changes could be.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, like, it can be so scary to edit. Like, you just finished, you finished an 80,000 word novel, and now you got to go through it again. Like, what was it? Lamont, her dad makes her toss the stories away and rewrite them from her head, like.
I would cry.
Yeah. So, but yeah, they're small changes usually. You're not having to go through and rewrite everything. Like, you're looking for structural changes, and have fun with it. That editing part is where that real magic of writing begins. So.
Well, that's where you can put in those Easter eggs and the clues during the editing stage.
What is that?
During the editing stage, that's when you can start putting in
yeah.
Easter eggs and clues and whatever.
Right. And making sure, yes, because once you get to the end, right, and this matters with our story structure here tonight as well. When we're looking at the end, the climax, we need to be able to look back at the story and say, did it look like they made choices all the way through? But the choices have to lead us here. Like, we were given choices all the way through for our protagonist to do, but they still made the choices that led us to where we wanted to go. Like, that's super important, because we don't want to have what I would call a Scooby-Doo ending, right? Like, for this big, huge thing, like, it's Old Man Jenkins. Like, how could I have ever figured that out? As a reader, we want to be able to look back and say, man, why didn't I think of that? Like, I see it now. Like, it's so clear now looking back, but I never would have seen this coming.
Josh Hayes says, I only edit my chapter titles. Everything else is perfect in place.
Yeah, those Air Force guys, they think they're so hot shit.
Supreme overlord boss.
Love you, Josh.
So with that in mind, when you're brainstorming a story, how do you balance structure and character development when the plot of the story and the character's arc are playing off of each other so much?
Did we hit this before?
We've kind of been, talking about it with the characters and their emotions.
So I think that you need to first think of it like building a house. Okay. You don't build the house one room at a time. You start with foundation. So what's more important to you in the story? Is it, again, look at the audience. So is it more plot heavy or more character heavy? Let's lay down the character, what the character has to go through and where it has to happen, and we adjust the plot to fit. Or do we lay the plot down first and then we adjust the character to fit? So we want to we want to remove pieces. We want to move things back to make it simpler. We want to see the mechanics running at a simpler pace instead of trying to juggle all the balls at the same time. You build a house to put down the foundation. You build up the stick wall. Then you come in, you put up the drywall, and then someone else is putting on interior. Then you start doing the lighting and running the electricity. And then you start, you do these in steps. And when you do it that way, it makes it simpler to understand. So you do need to know which is heavier. And I would always lean towards characters being more important to be able to lay that down. But if your ideas are more plot centered, again, if we're just talking about brainstorming new story ideas, maybe it's the plot is super exciting. This idea that you have for this event that takes place. So start there, and then think about what kind of characters will enhance that. Again, we want to be enhancing everything that we do. What makes it even better than what it was before on its own.
Awesome. Just wrapped it up in a perfect little bow there.
Yeah, I agree. That's good. Did we ask this question? When is going off structure acceptable in a story? I mean, you kind of said, it's your story, whatever you want to do. That's great. You might be writing yourself. You might be the audience for writing too, and that's wonderful. That's what some people we're all writing for ourselves too. But can you think of any examples of where an author intentionally broke proper structure and it worked? It really worked.
So and this one's perhaps not exactly the right one, but so in the book Gone Girl, as I'm reading through Gone Girl, I'm thinking that this is an American revenge tale, right? And this guy is getting screwed over again and again and again, and I want to see him get back at her, right? I want to see him turn the tables. But what happens? Like his life just continues all apart, and there she is at the end, right? And so, because it wasn't, I thought I was reading one type of book, and what it was a Greek tragedy, and it's a classic tragedy system, not a classic tragedy revenge system, not a Greek revenge, not a Greek tragedy. So it's a revenge, old school revenge, where everything falls apart because of your poor actions and trying to do something to twist things around. Like that's a whole different story than the classic American revenge story where the person would come back at the end to overcome all this stuff.
That makes so much sense. Wow. It does make sense with the ending.
Yeah. So sometimes it's taking, making people feel that you're writing one thing and then turning it on its head. And that's all about managing people's expectations with it. And so you could do that. And I think as you become, as you grow more into your voice and how you do several books in your genre at the same way, people will start to expect particular things from you. And you're going to have your own little style on there. Again, your voice, like how are you going to tell the story just a little different? Yeah, you got to follow some rules. So people, again, we're talking about, if we're looking at this as a language, we're looking at Western story as a dialect, you've got to be able to say the dialect most of the time, right? 75, 85% of the time. And you can swing in, a few percentage here and there that of other words from other languages or whatever, and you can toss it in and people will still follow along. That's what we got to do. We got to make them follow along. Yeah.
Which I don't think Italians suddenly just throw in English, but we do. I was reading down here. Last week, we looked at the structure of a short story. So how is structuring, I know we've touched a bit on it already, but structuring a novel, how is that different from structuring a short story?
Well, I mean, they are a lot the same. You've got the same basic story structure involved there. Remember that with the novel, you have more room to grow the character. So let's do that. We have more room to grow the world. Talking Harry Potter again, but Harry Potter is twice as long. That's why no one was going to buy the book up front. It's twice as long as it should have been for that genre and the age group, but twice as long gave us so much more to enjoy in that world, right? So look at what is the benefit of doing a novel. You got a lot more words to work with. So don't waste them. Still be very concise with them. Have an economy of words, but use them to grow character and use them to grow the world so that people will want to return to it again. Because you're not going to return to the same plot. They're going to return to the world. They're going to return to the characters if you're doing a series. So take the time to grow that.
Right. Yeah. And then with a short story, the more you can focus on that single central conflict, and have it from, beginning to climax to end, all in a short space of time, the better. But with the novel, you've got the chance to have all those interweaving conflicts and plots, kind of coming together to that climactic moment, and then resolving at the end as best, get them all wrapped up at the end, and then twist it for the next book.
Yeah, easy, no problem.
No problem.
Just go do that. Go bust that out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm thinking about my draft and how much I've got scenes that probably need to go in, maybe some that need to come out too.
Don't be scared. Don't be scared to make your novel better. Don't be scared to make it better. Like, just because you wrote the words, hey, today's a new day, write some new words. Like, it's just make it better, but don't spend forever on it. Don't waste 10, 20 years writing the same novel, because you could rewrite forever, because you're constantly getting better. You got to pick a time that, all right, I've got it done. This is where I'm at. It's time to move forward and go to something else.
Yeah.
There was a moment in one of my books that I spent like a month on this one scene, building it, trying to figure out everything. And then I finally am putting the stuff into place, and I'm like, it'd just be better if you just came in ranting about this whole scene instead of actually having the scene. So then I threw it out.
Exactly. Like, just summarizing what had happened in between. Like, there's a lot of times you can do stuff and cut things out, make it streamlined.
Yep, precisely. Oh man, my brain is like all the things, so I'm gonna try and focus. Questions. So one phrase we keep hearing is that a good ending should be surprising but inevitable. You may have already been talking a bit about this. And
I think we did, a little bit there with being able to look back. We see those choices that come along. But again, think of The Gone Girl. Also think of The Sixth Sense. That's a great one that really, you don't see it, but then it's like afterwards, you're like, oh, I should have seen it. Another one that turns it just a little bit, the end of Lord of the Rings, Frodo, he was never the hero. Frodo he wants to keep the ring at the end. Like Samwise Gamgee, he's the hero of the story there, and then the ring just falls in. So take things and twist them. You've got a lot of things to do. Like, one of the other ways you could look at is what are the expectations, and how can I turn those expectations around just enough to not lie to my audience, right? Because we got to be able to look back and see that it was going to happen, but that I can surprise them a little bit.
Just like life.
Yeah, right.
Oh man.
Man, I hope someone's taking notes, because all this is good.
I've been trying to. I've got several timestamps that I'm going to go back, but I'm pretty much just going to listen to the whole episode all over again, because there's too much good stuff in here. It really is. I'm kind of blown away. I'm just gonna sit here with my mind blown, trying to stare at this lovely worksheet that Lauren creates for us. And
then I guess we're close to the end of the hour, but one last quick question. As an editor, how can you tell when a novel structure is not working? Well, we kind of covered that.
I know. Like, just everything in the water, man.
Any big tells that jump out at you that this needs to be fixed?
So, like, and the author probably knew that they were there too. Like, as an editor, when you really see the big stuff, the author probably knew it was there too, but it was something they were holding on to. Like, they put a lot of time and effort into it, and they wanted to keep it and kind of wedge it in there. You'll see big holes that come along, and you just have to point them out and say, hey, this is not working. This doesn't feel right. Again, we're telling lies. That's what we do. We tell lies. We make magic. We create a fictional world. And at the same time, it still has to be believable, right? And so that's where we still have to have some of those things grounded. I just got done last week finally watching the second season of Westworld, and I was like, this is stupid. Because they went completely off of all kinds of different things. And to a point where I was just so like, why are these guns working this way? And like, I shouldn't be hung up on that kind of stuff. Like some of that type of stuff will pull a person out of a story. If it pulls them out of the story and they're concentrating on this ridiculous small question, then you've got to go in and restructure some things.
All right. So sometimes it just takes that outside pair of eyes. Maybe it's your bait or your
Right.
whoever it is, but to see what those flaws are and then to bring them to your attention, because we just don't see them as authors. It's, you know.
No, because we got it in our head. We see it playing out. So yeah, it's the curse. And you always think your kids are the best looking ones too. So I mean, it's just, you know, it's just one of those things that happens.
Oh my goodness. So I hate to like totally switch gears, but we have been having so much fun and amazing time talking about all of this. We forgot about our show sponsor. So I'm gonna dip that in there real quick. So this episode of The Writer's Journey is brought to you by Minds of Men by Kacey Ezell, the 2018 Dragon Award finalist, Best Alternate History Novel. Evelyn Adamsen grew up knowing she had to hide her psychic abilities, lest she be labeled a witch. However, when the U.S. Army Air Corps came calling in 1943, looking for psychic women to help their, oh my goodness, that word, beleaguered bomber force. Beleaguered, thank you. Evelyn answered, hoping to use her powers to integrate the bomber crews and save American lives. She was extremely successful at it, until her aircraft got shot down. Now, Evelyn is on the run in occupied Europe with a special unit of German Fallschirmjäger and an enemy psychic on her heels. Worse, Evelyn learns that using her psychic powers functions as a strobe that highlights her to the enemy. As the enemy psychic closes in, Evelyn is faced with a dilemma in her struggle to escape. How can she make it back to England when the only talent she has will expose her if she uses it?
Ooh, oh, that sounds good. Nice job. Good rating too.
And the show link is in the chat, and we will also have this eventually when we go Podbean and show notes. Anyway, segue, show sponsor, done, check.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm so glad we finally got you on, and good to see you. And thanks for sharing all your wisdom with us tonight.
Well, it's all my pleasure, really. So thank you so much for the opportunity. It really means a lot to me.
We definitely need to have you on again. I mean, you just seem to have such a giant wealth of knowledge, and you are an absolute pleasure to talk to. So if you will come back on, we want to have you on.
I might. I mean, you guys buttered me up enough. I think I could do it again. I'm gonna have a hard time getting out of this door. You know, my head's so big right now. So
if we are successful, oh man, so much knowledge. It's gonna be great. Well, thank you so much for coming. Thanks for everyone in the chat for hanging out with us. Let us know what you thought about the show in the comments. Give us a like, give us a subscribe, all that good stuff. Thumbs up. We love to hear from you. We want to hear all the comments. For Lauren Moore, I'm Kayleen Williams. Thank you for joining us on your writer's journey. Be sure to check back with us next Thursday, 7 p.m. CST, 9 p.m. Eastern, where we're going to talk about some reading, we're going to talk about some writing, and everything else in between, right here on Keystroke Medium.
Night.
Good night, you guys.